If you're in a Hoyle server, you probably noticed that almost every top player now runs Seasoned Rick, Call to Arms Dwight, and Ezekiel on their F1. This lineup is extremely effective, even without combat speed bonus from full chemistry, and it can defeat the original formation of Machon, Jesus, and Ezekiel. Let's talk about why this works and what the trade-offs are. Let's start with the disadvantages first. First, the most obvious downside. You lose +1 combat speed from chemistry buff. Losing that 1 combat speed means the enemy Ezekiel with full chemistry will always attack first. On top of that, you're also losing the vigilance buff, which makes your formation more vulnerable to silence, especially during the first 3 turns, the most critical part of the fight. Since these 3 survivors are from different chemistries, you don't just lose that speed on F1, but also for F2 and F3. Because your formations will no longer have the full chemistry buff. Come to think of it, Seasoned Rick and Call to Arms Dwight have both been around for a while, but Whales didn't use this combo before because the sacrifice was too big. That brings us to the second disadvantage. You end up with a super strong F1, but much weaker F2 and F3. What makes it a little more tolerable now is the introduction of new chemistry, Fierce Defender, which help defend your Town Hall better even after your F1 is out. But still, if your F1 is out, your Town Hall becomes much more vulnerable to enemy Whale F1 attacks, especially now with vehicle armor widening the gap between F1 and other formations. Before, we used to see Violent Minds beating Elite Warriors sometimes, but that's no longer the case. The gap just keeps getting bigger. Now for the third disadvantage, which is a bit theoretical, because we haven't seen many Whales do it yet, but Ezekiel with Cavalry can counter melee Call to Arms Dwight. Now, here's something interesting. On Elite Warriors, Cavalry Ezekiel usually gets punished by Sharpshooter Ezekiel, since skills can hit every cruise, even the rear. But that dynamic changes when Call to Arms Dwight is involved. Because Call to Arms Dwight's diversionary tactics makes him to absorb most of the incoming damage, your enemy's Cavalry Ezekiel can actually attack more freely without worrying about being focused down too early. This is the best example I found for this scenario, where Call to Arms Dwight tanks all of Ezekiel's damage. It's actually a double-edged sword. Yes, Call to Arms Dwight keeps Ezekiel completely safe, but at the same time, it also makes him easier to counter. In this setup, Cavalry Ezekiel starts to shine again, since Call to Arms Dwight acts as a damage sponge, giving Cavalry Ezekiel more time to dish out consistent hits. So if you're using melee Call to Arms Dwight, your opponent's Cavalry Ezekiel might suddenly feel much more comfortable, and that's what makes this matchup so tricky. It's a small shift, but it really changes how these duels play out between Whales. If both sides use the same survivors, and the only difference is the Ezekiel troop type, it becomes a matter of who forces Call to Arms Dwight to retreat faster. If your Call to Arms Dwight retreats first, your tank collapses, and the fight snowballs. Example, let's say Call to Arms Dwight has 10,000 troops at the start of the battle. If you can kill for 1,000 troops faster than your opponent, his remaining 6,000 troop will retreat, leaving your team fighting 3v2 with a huge troop advantage. Your last hit on Dwight feels like it wipes out over 6,000 troops instantly. That's how important to counter to Call to Arms Dwight troop type. Now let's talk about the advantages. First, the most obvious one. Seasoned Rick and Call to Arms Dwight have 1,500 more total troops than Michon and Jesus combined. In a Whales battle, where stats are nearly identical, that extra 1,500 troops is huge considering in the first turn enemy Ezekiel can only kill up to about 1,203 troops against Elite Warriors. But with Seasoned Rick and Call to Arms Dwight enemy Ezekiels can only kill up to 633 troops. So even though you lose the +1 combat speed, you still have more troops than the Elite Warriors lineup after the first turn. And honestly, if you're playing defense, you're not really punished that hard for losing combat speed. Since this is the order of attack when you are playing defense, if you are against Elite Warriors, it doesn't change much. Second advantage, better skills, literally a skill issue. Call to Arms Dwight and Seasoned Rick simply have way better kits than Michon and Jesus. Michon's shield only blocks normal attacks, while Dwight's diversionary tactics gives him a skill shield, which is way more valuable since most of the damage in season maps comes from skills, not normal attacks. Seasoned Rick is also a far better support than Jesus. His second skill, Unyielding, gives 17.5% damage reduction for 3 turns and 17.5% skill damage reduction for 5 turns, and the best part, it's a pre-turn skill. That means it activates before enemy Ezekiel even attacks. Seasoned Rick doesn't care about losing combat speed, because regardless of your combat speed, his main job happens before the battle truly begins. Even if he gets silenced afterward, who cares? His other skills aren't game changers anyway. Ezekiel deals about 60% of total kills, Seasoned Rick just about 20%. He's there to buff and tank, not to deal great damage. And Call to Arms Dwight, the Employee of the Year, is constantly working all throughout the battle. His diversionary tactics and payback time skills aren't bound by turns, so he keeps proxing shields and counter damage the whole fight. Even if he's silenced, he still keeps doing his job. He doesn't care about losing speed, he doesn't care about silence, he just keeps fighting. Look at this example. Even when it's the enemy Ezekiel's turn, Call to Arms Dwight is still dealing damage and gaining shields. The man literally works overtime. These to survivors is special because they are not punished that hard for losing a combat speed or after getting silenced. Third advantage, Ezekiel stays safe. Ezekiel is your main damage dealer, and keeping him untouchable is a game changer. With Call to Arms Dwight soaking up most of the hits, Ezekiel can deal damage freely and consistently, something the Elite Warriors lineup struggles with, since their Ezekiel is much more exposed. This trio Seasoned Rick, Dwight, and Ezekiel might not share official chemistry, but they have real synergy. A support that pre-buffs before the fight, a tank that absorbs everything, and a monster in the backline mowing down enemies. Fourth advantage, you save money. You don't need to buy Michonne anymore. If you're in early seasons, Holly can fill her role until you get Call to Arms Dwight. This lineup lets you stay competitive without spending on Michonne's fragments or packs. And that's it. I hope you learned something new in this video. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe for more breakdowns and strategy guides.